I was just talking to one of my teens. She's 16 and just started, driving. This girl is so intelligent and like very an old soul for her age. And I just love her to death. She is just now starting to be able to speak up to her parents and like have a voice. And she'll be like, I don't want to be disrespectful or I don't want to be this, but I feel this way. And I'm like, get that voice. I will help you. Let's talk about different ways you can approach that with still being respectful to your parents. But like your voice is, you're allowed to have that voice. Yes. And let's learn how to bring that up to your mom in here. Let's bring your mom in, or why don't you try doing this? And just seeing how much she's already grown in the last few months is like amazing. And I'm just like, this is where we say, talk about it in a safe space, because if you're out there and you're listening, or if you have a teen that's just kind of like everywhere, they're not talking to you anymore. They don't want anything to do with you. I know a lot of parents say that. They're like, oh, my teen's just completely closed off. They just go to their room or they're on their phones. Like every time I ask them a question, they just shut down. Okay, that's okay. Just letting them know that you're there when you need, absolutely. Not forcing them, but also saying, you want to just talk to somebody. You just want to have like someone that's not your parent or your brother or sister, like having someone to talk to, like, that's okay. Does it mean something is seriously wrong with your child? That's another thing, is still getting that stigma out of their minds. Like, oh, okay, so your child must have major depression, or your child must have this because they're not talking to you. Well, maybe they're a little bit depressed, but it doesn't mean that they have depression. There's a difference.
Again,
situation. You're coming to talk to my kids, because that's the thing. I think now that, again, positive negatives, the fact that, mental health is in conversations now, but again, it's like, but I'm this. No, y'all know how many demographics boxes you have to check. And it was funny. I just happened to see a little reel the other day, and this gentleman was like, yeah, that's just life. Yeah, that's just Tuesday. That was just your coffee spilling.
Yep.
No, that was traffic.
It's true. I mean, and that's unfortunate. Like I said, the social media aspect is so big, because they diagnose themselves. They're like, oh, well, I have that symptom, this symptom, this symptom. I'm experiencing this, this, and this. Okay, you can have this, but also just have situation, and you're growing and you're developing. So that is just one thing we need to talk to our teens more about, just like everyday things,
And don't be afraid to tell them your experiences. You don't have to tell them the whole kit and caboodle, but don't be afraid to tell your teens, hey, when I was your age, I struggled with a little bit of depression. And I think sometimes too, parents are afraid that if they talk to their kids about certain things, that all of a sudden, okay, the kid is going to be like, okay, that's what I have. That's what I have. Right. Sometimes normalizing, things.
Normalizing.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
Well, and when I'm working with my parents, because a lot of times it is, I said, listen, they know you love them, but you are operating from fear right here. And that's what they're feeling. And so they can't even understand anything over here, because they're so heightened in their limbic system. But it's also, I said, when you create that authenticity, with yourself, I said, even when it's uncomfortable, I said, but you create a space to where somebody else can come in and also be authentic. And that's where because I'm so wide but open. I mean, my students, but they know. And it's funny because, especially because, I'm system, so I work with all the family. And sometimes what I see is that when the teenagers start to find their voice, here comes daddy, here comes mama, here comes whatever, and Dr. Rob and Dr. Rob, and again, and I said, that's fine. I said, yes. I said, but here's the thing. This is what's happening. And I said, this is where they are. I said, however, you are still the parent, but I have to really bring them in too and say that this is what they're hearing. And so now it's like, then I got mom and dad. They're like, can you come in on Tuesday? Because, because it does bring up everything.
Yeah. And that just made me think too. It's like you said, like creating that space with them. And it's like, when you do create that space and they do open up, you need to check yourself. Like, I know we said this a few weeks ago, like you need to check yourself as a parent and say, how am I going to react? Am I reacting because I don't like what I'm hearing, but it's their truth? Or am I reacting because I feel just like, what is going to be your response after that? Because you're trying to create that space, but if you shut them down or you punish them for feeling a certain way, that is one of my biggest pet peeves. And I see it happen all the time. It's like, well, they told me they feel this, and that's just not true. I don't do that. Or I don't do this. Okay, you may not think you are. I'm not saying you're coming from a bad place being a parent. But they're feeling that way for a reason. You have to listen, and your job now is to listen to your child. And I'm so, that gets me so upset because I see it so often where parents will, like, the child opens up like, okay, well, what's your deal? I'm just going to give you a scenario. So let's say your son is, closing off to you. You guys used to be really close. He's now trying to go off in his, figure things out. He likes a girl, and you're trying to be intrusive and really ask him a lot of questions. Well, he's not ready to go there yet with you. Right. Well, then finally, when he does go there with you, you're like, well, I want to know X, Y, and Z. I want to know where you're doing, where you're doing. Let me see your text messages. Let me check your social media. Let me do this. Let me do this.
Look over here.
Exactly. And then what does that do?
Then
that's they're going to be like, nope. Guess what? I'm pulling back. And then you're wondering why your child again pulls back from you or then lies to you. And that's another thing. If you constantly have a child that is lying to you and you're constantly catching them in lies, check yourself for a second. I'm not saying it's your fault as a parent, but I'm saying you need to figure out why they're lying. Are they lying because they don't feel that they can come to you? Are they lying because if they do come to you, you're just going to shut them down or punish them for a certain way, the way they're feeling? So this again goes back to us on being a parent is you can't just always point the finger to the child. It's not the child to be fixed. Sometimes it's you to really try to understand where they're coming from.
And one of my things that I say is being a parent does not come with a handbook.
No.
And every kid is different. Mm-hmm. And, even in your own home, the kids that you have more than one child, yes, they're different. And you have to parent them different.
Yes.
The love can be the same, but you parent them different. And you have to know your kid. I've had kids, two of my girls are like, they told me everything. Some stuff I didn't want to know. But then my son is more closed off. And sometimes I think it's because I'm a woman and he doesn't think, he told me you're not a man. But you definitely have to know your kids because I tell my parents, look, if parenting came with a handbook, I'll tell you to look on page 74 and just
exactly.
Oh, go to page 101. Why don't you go to
it's highlighted.
The table of contents? It's right there. But it's not. Mm-hmm. So know your kid. Spend that time, like, as you said, listening more and talking less.
Listening more, talking less. Right. I like that.
Yeah.
That was even a leadership thing I saw. They said, one of the top 5 traits of leaders, the very first one was active listening.
Yep.
And it's funny because, I always say, education, I'm more of a direct, more of a teacher, coaching, but doing this full, the last 3 years. It's funny. I was thinking that to myself the other day. I was like, God, I listen so much now and I hear things so quickly now. As soon as I hear it, cause I'm like, oh yeah, that's that. Okay. I get, and that's the thing. It's like, but I still, there's still things. And I told someone, I live it, breathe it, eat it, sleep it, research it, teach it. Yeah. And I'm still a human.
Yeah.
I still have children. Yeah. And I still mess up.
Yeah.
And I still don't know. but it's funny because you said know your children first. Can I go a little bit deeper and say you gotta know yourself first?
True.
You gotta know yourself first.
By then you do.
Unfortunately, that's the problem. Yeah. I'm sorry, but that's the problem.
There's hope.
I said things just get taller and older sometimes. Yeah. But I also tell him, and I also tell him, I said, because, I came from definitely we were latchkey kids, we were the first generation. I said, we didn't have emotions. They weren't invented. Like, we could be crying, whatever. You coming out? Yes, ma'am. You want broccoli? Okay. Like, that's what it was.
So what are you crying for?
Yeah. I'll give you something to cry. I'll give you something to cry for.
And then you look like this. No, we're kidding. So, but I said so many times to my teenagers, I said, here's the thing. You all now are the ones with the vocabulary. I said, y'all are teaching your parents. And a lot of times, that space between learning and not learning, that frustration, when parents start to lash out, it's because they're frustrated too. And I said, but it's not just they're wrong, you're right, they're wrong. Sometimes like you want to be right or you want to keep the peace.
Right. And parents are trying to do all that they've learned how to do, like from our, generation to generation, culture shifts and things like that. Like we're also learning, but that is again where I always tell parents to check yourself because where are you parenting from? Where are you parenting from? Fear, a lot of times fear, your own personal beliefs, which is fair, how you were raised, that's fair, but at the same time, we said this a couple of weeks ago, what is your goal? Are you trying to get through to your child? Are you trying to have a good relationship with them? Or are you trying to prove that you're right? I mean, come on. Are you just trying to prove that you're right and they're wrong? Or like, because what is that going to do? Okay, you're a parent. You're the one that's always right, right? But how is that going to help your child? I mean, because I can't tell you how many times even still to this day, things cut out of my kid's mouth. And I'm like, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like, really? Did you really just say that to me? But at the same time, I'm like, okay. Come back to that in 5 years, and I want to hear that. I'm going to remember what you just said to me. I'm going to remember that statement, and I'm going to go like, yeah, you're so right.